I'm not the type of person who usually gets scared easily. In fact, I've always loved the idea of having the house to myself. No interruptions, no responsibilities, just pure, undisturbed relaxation. So when my parents told me they were going out of town for the weekend, I was actually pretty excited. This is something that happened to me a few weeks ago that I just can't shake. We live in this old house, one of those places that has a lot of character. It creaks a lot, especially when the wind blows, and the floors make these weird groaning sounds every time you walk down the hallway. But I was used to it. I'd lived there my whole life. I never really thought much of it. That Friday night, it was just me and a bunch of snacks, a list of movies I've been dying to binge watch, and the whole weekend ahead of me. It was a stormy night. The wind was howling like crazy, and the rain was coming down in sheets, beating against the windows. But I was curled up on the couch, blankets wrapped around me, the warm glow of the TV lighting up the living room. I could hear the rain outside and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows, but inside it felt safe and cozy. At least at first. About an hour into my movie, I heard this faint scratching noise. At first I didn't think much of it. Old houses make noises, right? I just figured it was the wind, or maybe the house settling. But it kept happening. Every few minutes, this weird scratching, almost like nails on wood, coming from above me. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't super thrilled about the idea of investigating strange noises. But I convinced myself it was nothing, probably just a tree branch brushing against the side of the house or something like that. I turned up the volume on the TV and tried to forget about it. But then I got a text from my friend Sarah. It was one of those joke texts like, "Hey, you better be careful watching scary movies all alone in that creepy old house of yours." I laughed it off, texted her back something snarky, and went back to watching my movie. The scratching sound hadn't stopped though. If anything, it was getting louder, more persistent. I finally paused the movie and listened closely. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the attic. I sat there for a minute, just staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But it wasn't. The sound was real, and it was starting to freak me out. I decided to go upstairs and check it out just to put my mind at ease. Our attic is one of those old, dusty spaces where we keep all the stuff we don't really use anymore. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old furniture, stuff like that. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the narrow staircase, every step making the wood beneath me groan and creak. By the time I reached the top, my heart was pounding in my chest. I slowly pushed open the door, shining the flashlight into the dark corners of the attic. Nothing, just the usual clutter, everything covered in a layer of dust. I stood there for a while listening, but the scratching had stopped. It was dead silent. I let out a breath. I didn't even realize I'd been holding and laughed at myself for being so jumpy. I closed the door, headed back downstairs, and tried to settle back into my movie. But as soon as I sat down, the power went out. Just like that, everything was pitch black. I could hear the wind howling outside, and the house seemed so much quieter without the TV on. I fumbled for my phone, using it as a flashlight, and went looking for candles. As I was walking through the dark hallway, I glanced out the window, and that's when I saw it, just for a split second, a shadow moving outside. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was probably just the wind, maybe a tree branch swaying or something, but it didn't feel right. I hurried back to the living room, lighting a few candles and trying to calm myself down. The power outage was probably just because of the storm. It happened all the time in our neighborhood. No big deal. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Then the power came back on, but something felt off. I can't explain it, but there was this weird tension in the air. I tried to shake it off and went back to my movie, but I couldn't focus. I kept hearing these faint noises, little creaks, almost like footsteps, but every time I'd look around, there was nothing. And then my phone died. I wasn't even using it, but the battery just drained completely. No more flashlight, no more way to call anyone. At this point, I was feeling pretty uneasy, but I didn't want to panic. I decided to call Sarah on the landline, just for some company. But when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. The line was dead. That's when I saw it again, a figure standing in the hallway, just outside the living room. My heart stopped. It was just a shadow, but it was definitely there. Tall, still, and watching me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My brain was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, staring at this figure, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it started walking toward me. I finally snapped out of my paralysis and bolted for the front door, but it was locked. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking, but I couldn't get it open. I turned around, and the figure was gone. I ran back to the living room, grabbing the nearest heavy object I could find, an old iron fireplace poker. I stood there, shaking, waiting for the figure to come back. But nothing happened. Minutes passed, and the house was silent again. I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing, if maybe the stress of being alone had gotten to me. But I knew what I saw. It wasn't my imagination. I decided to search the house to make sure I was alone. I checked every room, every closet, but there was no one there. The front door was still locked from the inside, and all the windows were shut tight. But the feeling of being watched never went away. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, clutching the fireplace poker, jumping at every little noise. The power stayed on, but I didn't dare turn off the lights. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in that house another night, not after what happened. I never told my parents about it. They wouldn't believe me, but I know what I saw. By the time my parents came back, everything seemed normal. The power was fine, no strange noises, and the house didn't feel as threatening in the daylight. I didn't say a word about what happened. I didn't even know how to explain it without sounding like I had lost it. But the weirdest thing was, no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. A few days passed, and I started to forget about that night. The memory faded into the background like a bad dream you try not to think about. Life went back to normal, at least on the surface. But then something else happened. It was about a week later. I was in my room doing some late night studying for an exam when I heard it again, that same scratching noise. At first I thought I was imagining it because I'd been so freaked out the week before. I turned up my music, trying to block it out, but it just got louder, more insistent. This time, it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from right outside my bedroom door. I sat there, staring at the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what was on the other side. But I couldn't just sit there either. Slowly, I stood up and crossed the room. Every step felt like it took an eternity. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I paused, listening. The scratching had stopped, but now there was a different sound, something like breathing. I pulled open the door, expecting, well, I don't know what I was expecting, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway. I stepped out, my eyes darting around, trying to see if there was something I had missed. I walked down the hallway, checking the other rooms. Everything looked normal, but I could still hear it, the breathing. It was faint, like it was coming from far away, but it was there. I went back to my room and locked the door. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I decided to tell my parents. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. I needed to get this off my chest. I sat them down at breakfast and told them everything about the noises, the figure I saw, how I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house. They listened quietly, exchanging glances with each other. I could tell they didn't believe me. My dad just smiled and said, "Emily, you've been watching too many horror movies." But my mom looked worried. She didn't say anything, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew something wasn't right. Later that day, my mom pulled me aside. She told me something that I had never heard before. Apparently, the house used to belong to my great aunt, someone I had never met or even heard about until that moment. She had lived alone in the house for years, and according to my mom, she wasn't exactly all there. She'd become paranoid in her later years, convinced that someone or something was living in the house with her. At first, my mom said the family thought it was just old age getting to her, but then things started happening. Strange things. She'd talk about hearing noises at night, things moving around, shadows in the hallway. Eventually, she became so terrified that she moved out and lived the rest of her life in a small apartment in town. My mom didn't tell me this to scare me. She was trying to explain why I might be feeling on edge, why I might be imagining things. But instead of making me feel better, it made everything worse. After that, I couldn't stay in the house. I moved in with Sarah for a while, just to get some space. Every time I thought about going back, my stomach would twist into knots. I couldn't shake the image of that figure standing in the hallway or the sound of those scratching noises at night. But here's the thing, I didn't tell anyone else about what happened. Not even Sarah. I didn't want people to think I was losing it. But a few weeks after I moved out, Sarah came over to my place to grab some of my stuff for me. She had agreed to stay the night and help me sort through everything just to get it over with. I wasn't with her when she went inside, but when she came back out, her face was pale, like she had seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" I asked, thinking she was gonna laugh and tell me some silly story about the house being creepy. But she didn't laugh. "There's something wrong with that place, Emily," she said, her voice shaky. "I heard something in there, something scratching at the walls. And I swear, when I looked out the window, I saw someone standing in the yard just staring up at the house." I froze. My stomach churned, and my heart started racing again. I wanted to tell her it was probably just the wind, or that her mind was playing tricks on her because of everything I had told her. But I knew better. I don't live in that house anymore. My parents still do, and they say everything's fine. They haven't noticed anything unusual, no strange noises, no figures lurking in the dark. But every time I go back to visit, I can feel it, the heaviness in the air, the sense that someone or something is watching. Maybe it's all in my head. Maybe it's just the house's old creaky bones settling into the earth. But deep down, I know what I saw, and I know I'm not the only one. I haven't told anyone else about this. Not until now. I don't even know if people will believe me. But I had to get it out, had to share it with someone. Because even though I'm far away from that house now, I still dream about it sometimes. I still see that figure standing in the hallway, watching me. And every time I wake up, I wonder if maybe it wasn't a dream at all. For a while, I tried to push it all to the back of my mind. I mean, it was just too strange to deal with. Maybe I was losing my grip on things, stress, school, all of it could have gotten to me. I started seeing a therapist. Nothing too intense, just someone to help me talk through things and hopefully bring me back to some kind of normal. But even with all the therapy and all the time that had passed, I still couldn't go back to that house. My parents would ask when I was going to stop by and visit. I'd always make excuses, too much schoolwork, plans with friends, whatever I could think of. But the truth was, I didn't want to set foot in there again. Then, one evening, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I was at Sarah's place, just hanging out and trying to forget about everything. We'd ordered pizza, and it was just a chill night in, nothing out of the ordinary. But as we were sitting there talking, Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her face just went white. "Emily, did you go home?" I shook my head, confused. "No, why?" She handed me her phone, and my stomach dropped. On the screen was a photo message, just a picture of the front of my house. It was dark, but the porch light was on, and there, standing at the window, was a figure. A shadowy figure, just like the one I had seen in the hallway that night. My throat went dry. "Who sent this?" I whispered. "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's from an unknown number. I thought maybe you had gone home and were playing some kind of prank, but..." We stared at the photo, both too stunned to say anything for a moment. My hands shook as I handed the phone back to her. "Sarah, I haven't been back there in months. I don't even have the porch light on a timer or anything like that." "Then who the hell is that in the window?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I couldn't answer. I didn't want to think about it. All I knew was that I wasn't going back to that house. Ever. We sat in silence for a while, both of us too freaked out to keep talking. Sarah eventually deleted the message, and we tried to move on with our night, but neither of us could shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. A few days passed, and I tried not to think about the picture, but it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Who had sent it? Was someone messing with me? Or was it something else? And why hadn't my parents mentioned anything about strange things happening at the house? Then, one afternoon, I got a call from my mom. "Emily, honey, I don't want to freak you out," she began, which was never a good sign, "but your dad and I have been hearing some weird noises at the house lately. It's probably nothing, but I thought I should let you know." I felt my stomach twist. "What kind of noises?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Scratching," she said quietly. "From the attic." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Mom, you need to leave the house." "What? Why?" "I'm serious. Just trust me. Get out of there. Stay with Aunt Linda or at a hotel or something." "Emily, you're scaring me," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm scared too," I admitted. "Please just do it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, fine. We'll leave tonight. But Emily, you need to come back and help us figure out what's going on." I didn't answer right away. The thought of going back to that house made my skin crawl. But I couldn't leave my parents to deal with this on their own, not after everything that had happened. "I'll come by tomorrow," I finally said, though every fiber of my being was screaming at me not to. That night, I barely slept. I kept having nightmares about the house, about the figure in the hallway, about the scratching noises. But the worst part was the dream where I went back and found my parents standing in the living room, staring at me with blank, empty eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The next day, I forced myself to go back to the house. Sarah offered to come with me, but I told her it was something I had to do on my own. I didn't want to put anyone else in danger. If there was something wrong with the house, I had to face it. When I pulled up to the driveway, everything looked normal. The porch light was off, and the house looked just like it always had. But the minute I stepped out of the car, that same heavy feeling settled over me, like the air was thicker here, like the house was watching me. I stood there for a minute, just staring at the front door, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Part of me wanted to turn around, get back in the car, and never come back. But I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet. My parents weren't home yet. They had gone to stay with my aunt, just like I had asked. I walked through the hallway, the floor creaking beneath my feet, and made my way to the living room. Nothing seemed out of place, but I could feel it, that sense of something being wrong. of something lurking just out of sight. I made my way upstairs to the attic. The door was closed, just like I had left it that night. My heart was racing as I reached for the doorknob. The scratching noises had stopped, but I could still hear them in my mind, that horrible, persistent sound that had haunted me for months. I opened the door and shined my flashlight into the darkness. The attic looked the same as it always had. Dusty boxes, old furniture, nothing unusual. But I stepped inside anyway, determined to figure out what had been causing the noises. As I walked deeper into the attic, I noticed something strange. One of the floorboards was loose, sticking up slightly from the rest. I knelt down and pried it open, my hands shaking. Beneath the floorboard was a small, dusty box. I pulled it out and opened it, expecting to find old photos or maybe some family heirlooms. But inside, there were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my great aunt, the one who had lived here before us. The letters were old, the paper yellowed with age, but the handwriting was neat and precise. I sat down on the floor and started reading. The letters were from someone named James, someone who clearly had some kind of obsession with my great aunt. As I read through them, a chill ran down my spine. James wrote about watching her, about knowing her every move, about how she would never be able to escape him. The letters became more and more unhinged as I went through them, until the last one, which was dated just a few weeks before my great aunt had moved out of the house. The last letter was different from the others. It wasn't addressed to my great aunt. It was addressed to me. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was the same, neat and precise, but the words sent a chill down my spine. "Emily, I've been waiting for you." For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the letter. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. How could someone have written this to me? The letter was old, yellowed like the rest of them, and yet it was addressed to me by name. I had never even lived in this house until my parents bought it. I had never met this James. So how did he know my name? My heart was pounding in my chest as I read the rest of the letter. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears, but I forced myself to keep going, even though every part of me wanted to stop. "Emily, I've been waiting for you. You belong to this house, just like she did, just like they all did. You can't run from this. You can't hide. I'll always be here watching, waiting. You'll see me soon." I dropped the letter and scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. None of this made sense. How could this letter have been written to me? And how could it have been sitting under the floorboard for so long? I backed away from the attic, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the flashlight. I had to get out of there. I had to leave. I practically flew down the stairs, not even bothering to shut the attic door behind me. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and my breath came in shallow gasps as I grabbed my keys off the kitchen counter and ran for the front door. But when I got there, the door wouldn't open. The lock wouldn't budge. I twisted it back and forth, pulling as hard as I could, but it was stuck. I ran to the back door, same thing. It was like the house was trying to keep me in. I stood there for a moment, frozen in panic. Then I remembered the windows. I sprinted to the nearest one and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge either. I pulled harder, trying not to panic, but it was like the whole house had been sealed shut. And then I heard it, that scratching noise. But this time, it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from the hallway. Slowly, I turned around, my heart in my throat. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the candle I had left burning on the kitchen counter. And there, at the end of the hallway, was a shadow, a figure just like the one I had seen that night. I backed up, my legs trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there silent and still. But the scratching continued, louder now, closer. I grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife, and held it out in front of me, even though I knew it wouldn't do any good. The figure started to move toward me, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice trembling. "Stay away." But it kept coming. I backed up until I was pressed against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the sweat dripping down my face, and my hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the knife. The figure was getting closer, and the scratching noise was deafening now, like nails on a chalkboard. Just when I thought it was all over, the figure stopped. It stood there, just a few feet away from me, still and silent. And then, without warning, it vanished. Just like that, it was gone. I stood there for a long moment, too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. The house was silent again. The scratching was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I found the courage to move. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the knife. I walked slowly through the house, checking every door, every window, but they were all still locked tight. I tried to call Sarah, but my phone was dead. No matter how many times I pressed the power button, it wouldn't turn on. I was trapped. For the rest of the night, I sat on the floor in the living room, clutching the knife in my hand, waiting for the figure to come back. But it didn't. The house was eerily silent, except for the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of the floorboards. When the sun finally came up, I wasted no time. I grabbed my bag, my car keys, and I didn't even bother to pack anything else. I was getting out of that house, and I wasn't coming back. But just as I was about to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There on the kitchen counter was the box I had found in the attic. The same box with the letters inside. I had left it up in the attic, hadn't I? Slowly, I walked over to it, my heart racing. I opened the box, half expecting to find more letters addressed to me. But instead, there was only one. Just one letter lying on top of the pile. My hands shaking, I picked it up and unfolded it. It was blank. That was the last time I ever set foot in that house. I don't know what happened that night, and I don't know who or what was in the house with me. But I do know one thing. I'm never going back. Not ever. My parents still live there, and they say everything's fine. They haven't noticed anything strange. No more scratching noises. No more figures in the hallway. They tell me I'm being paranoid, that I just let my imagination get the best of me. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. Something was in that house with me, and it wasn't just my imagination. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the scratching. Even though I'm miles away from that house, I can hear it, like it's following me. I don't know if it's ever going to stop. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. But I do know one thing. Whatever it is, it's still waiting for me. After I left that house, things seemed to calm down, at least for a while. I stayed with Sarah, trying to put all of it behind me. My parents called every now and then, asking when I'd be coming back for a visit. They still had no idea about the letters or the figure I saw, and I wasn't about to tell them. I figured it was better that way. No point in scaring them over something they didn't seem to be experiencing. But it didn't take long before I started noticing things again. At first, it was just small stuff. The same old scratching sound, but this time, it wasn't coming from the house. I'd hear it when I was out, sitting in class, or sometimes late at night when Sarah and I were watching TV. It was faint, but it was there. Always that same scratching, like nails scraping against wood, just barely noticeable over the normal sounds of life. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. I mean, after everything I'd been through, it made sense, right? My mind was playing tricks on me. That's what I kept repeating over and over in my head. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Then the dream started. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, with the memory of that figure standing in the hallway fresh in my mind. In the dreams, it was always the same. I'd be back in the house, standing in the living room, and the figure would be there just watching me. It wouldn't move, it wouldn't speak. It would just stand there, and I'd feel this overwhelming sense of dread, like I couldn't breathe. One night I woke up and could swear I heard the scratching again, right outside my window. I lay there, frozen in bed, my heart racing. I didn't dare move. I didn't want to look out the window. I didn't want to know what was out there. But the sound didn't stop. It went on for what felt like hours, that same persistent scratching like something was trying to get in. The next morning, I checked the window, but there was nothing there. No marks, no signs that anything had been outside. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah noticed that I wasn't myself. I hadn't told her about the letters or the dreams, but she could tell that something was off. One day, she sat me down and asked if I was okay. I wanted to tell her everything, but I didn't know where to start. I didn't want her to think I was losing it. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a little stressed." She didn't push, but I could tell she didn't believe me. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mom. She sounded a little off, her voice shaky. "Emily, something weird happened," she said. "We found more letters. They were hidden under the floorboards in the attic." My stomach dropped. "What kind of letters?" I asked, even though I already knew. "They were addressed to your great aunt," she continued. "But there's one more thing. One of them was addressed to you." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Mom, you need to leave the house. Right now." "What are you talking about?" "It's just some old letters," she said, clearly trying to stay calm, but I could hear the unease in her voice. "Mom, please, just trust me. Get out of the house." There was a long pause. "Emily, what's going on?" I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. But I couldn't let them stay in that house. Not after everything that had happened. "Just leave. Please." Another pause. "Okay, we'll go. But we need to figure out what's happening here, Emily." I hung up, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. I felt like the walls were closing in, like no matter how far away I got from that house, it would always follow me. The figure, the scratching, the letters, it was all connected, but I didn't know how. Later that night, I got another text. This time, it was from an unknown number. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a picture of me, taken from outside the window of Sarah's apartment. I froze. Someone was watching me. Someone had been outside, taking pictures of me while I slept. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickly called Sarah into the room. When I showed her the picture, her face went pale. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know who's doing this. We called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd send someone to check out the area, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. Whoever, or whatever, was watching me was smarter than that. They wouldn't leave any trace." That night, I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, felt like it could be something more. I kept the lights on, but even that didn't make me feel safe. Over the next few days, more texts came in. Pictures of me, taken at random times throughout the day. At school, in the coffee shop, walking down the street. Whoever was doing this knew exactly where I was at all times. It was suffocating. I felt like I couldn't escape. Then one evening, I got a call from my mom again. Her voice was frantic this time, and I could hear my dad talking in the background. "Emily, we came back to the house today, and something's wrong," she said. "The front door was wide open when we got here, but nothing's missing. We thought maybe it was an animal or something, but then we found this." She sent me a picture. It was of a note, scrawled in the same handwriting as the letters. The note was pinned to the front door, and it simply said, "I'm coming for you, Emily." My hands shook as I stared at the photo. It felt like my entire world was collapsing around me. Whoever or whatever this was, it wasn't done with me yet. I knew I couldn't keep running. I had to face whatever this was, had to figure out why this was happening. But I was terrified. I told Sarah everything about the letters, the figure, the scratching. I showed her the pictures, the texts, everything. She listened in silence, her face pale. "We have to go back to the house," I said, my voice shaking. "We have to figure out what's going on." "Are you crazy?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You can't go back there, Emily." "I don't have a choice," I said. "It's never going to stop unless I do." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed to come with me. We packed our bags, and the next day, we drove back to my parents' house. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew we couldn't run from this anymore. When we arrived, the house was quiet. My parents had left again, not wanting to be there after what they'd found. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards under my feet sending a chill down my spine. Sarah followed close behind, her face set in a grim expression. Neither of us spoke as we made our way through the house, heading toward the attic. The door was still open from the last time I'd been here. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, before pushing it open and stepping inside. The attic was just as I remembered, dusty, cluttered, and filled with the same eerie silence that had haunted me for months. I walked slowly toward the spot where I'd found the letters, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it, another box, sitting in the exact same spot as the first one. My breath caught in my throat as I knelt down and opened it. Inside were more letters, and just like before, one of them was addressed to me. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Emily, I'm closer than you think. As we reach the end of tonight's chilling tale, remember, the darkness can be both a friend and a foe. If you can manage to close your eyes and drift off, do so, but keep one ear open for the whispers of the night." Thank you for joining us in the Horror Shack. If you enjoyed this story and want more spine-tingling content, don't forget to subscribe. I'll leave you with some haunting sounds to accompany your descent into sleep, if you dare. Sweet dreams, if you can find them. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on